Hello and welcome to episode number 270. This is the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com, and I'm Cornelius Fichtner. Welcome back. How do you know whether or not someone is actually doing the work they are supposed to be doing on your project? Well, we could assume that if they are assigned to our project, then, well, they must be working on the project, right? Well, maybe. But sometimes it's not so clear. Sometimes you just don't have that warm, fuzzy feeling with someone. And that pretty much is the point where today's interview with Margaret Meloni gets started. From here, we will explore how such situations can occur, how line managers could be responsible for causing this kind of feeling in us project managers, and we'll take a look at a few examples from Margaret's professional life. But most importantly, of course, we will look at what can be done to both avoid and then also deal with such situations. And now, are you really listening? Enjoy the interview.
The Project Management Podcasts feature interview.
Today with Margaret Meloni, community leader at elearningforpms.com and pmstudent.com.
Hello, Margaret. Welcome back to the Project Management Podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here, as always.
I'm very happy to have you. So you have sent me a draft article that's going to be published in one of your e-zines in the coming weeks. Mm-hmm. And listeners who listen to this in the year 2025, for them it will already be in the past. And this article is going to talk about whether or not resources on your projects are actually working for you and not working for someone else. And let's set the stage here. Mm-hmm. What is the takeaway going to be for our listeners here?
Sometimes you start a project and you're not feeling comfortable as to whether or not the people who are showing up and smiling at you in status meetings, as to whether or not they've really jumped into the work yet. And we're going to look at that situation and tackle it and see how do you know and what can you do about it and how could you have prevented this.
Okay, so set this up a little bit more for me. So we have a team meeting and people are coming in and what's the problem that we are trying to solve right now? Well,
it's something like this. And I'll just tell you right now, I know that it has happened to me. And other people have come to me with this as well. And, it's the beginning of your project. It's definitely within the first month. You're doing a great job. You've already had the kickoff. You have people assigned to you. And you're having them come in for, let's say, good weekly updates. And you run high quality, good meetings. And there's at least this one resource who comes in, always looks at you. She's always smiling. When it's her turn to speak, she assures you that everything is perfect. No issues to report. Everything is on track. For some reason, you're just not getting, we call it the warm fuzzy. I'll say, your project manager intuition warning bells are going off. And you're just not sure that she's really jumped into the project yet.
So what could lead to something like this occurring?
Well, let's go back to the beginning. So when your project was approved and this resource was assigned, now, we want to talk a little bit about project management, project organizations for a minute here, project organizational structures. If you're running the projectized organization, then this shouldn't happen. You should already know what's going on because that person should be reporting to you 100% of their time. What we're really looking at is when you're in the matrix situation and running using a matrix organization, which so many projects and organizations use. And so this person was assigned to you by someone else. A non-project manager, I'm going to use the name functional manager. A functional manager has assigned this resource to you. Well, sometimes what happens is if you're that functional manager, you don't want to be the one who couldn't provide a resource because this project is ready to start. The sponsors are excited and it's ready to go. And nobody wants to be the one that says you can't start yet because my resource isn't ready. And so sometimes what happens is a manager might call someone up and say, you're going to work on Margaret's project. but I know you're really finishing up Cornelius's project. And so show up in her meetings so that she, doesn't report us as not having anyone on the project. And don't worry about it. Start in a couple of weeks as soon as you finish Cornelius's project and just catch up. So I'm going to just stop there. And I don't know if you've ever had that happen. I just know that I've seen it.
Yeah, it's definitely happened to me as well, where you're just thinking something's wrong here. In the end, it's going to work out because these people are coming on board over time, but you've lost all that time. So, what are some of the questions that you ask yourself and other people when you realize that something like this is going on here? That when your alarm bells are going off?
Absolutely. I'm going to start with the resource first. And if I'm not getting that good feeling about it, I'm going to ask to see some of their work and some of their deliverables, perhaps ask them to do a review session, bring something to the next meeting, allow me to sit in if they're, it's somebody and they're supposed to be interviewing our customer for requirements. I might ask to participate. I might call the customer and say, how is it going with the requirements gathering sessions? Any way that I can check in. I'm not going to call the person a liar. I could be wrong, by the way. But anything that I can do to check in to confirm what is really happening.
All of this is not really happening maliciously, is it?
I don't think so. I think that could be a situation. Truthfully, as we're talking right now today, I'm not specifically thinking of somebody with malicious intent. I'm really thinking of the situation where people are overworked and overwhelmed, and they really are feeling like they can catch up. The challenge, of course, as you know, there's a lot of challenges here and a lot of risk is, was my schedule created with the assumption that they didn't really jump into the project until 3 weeks or a month after it starts? Or was my project schedule created with an understanding that they were contributing, X% of their time from the beginning?
Right. So not only look at the resource themselves, but look at what you and the functional manager agreed upon.
Exactly. Because we could be lying. And again, not maliciously or purposefully.
Just because the nature of what's going on just forces them to, oh my God, I got to be at the meeting, but I can't deliver any work yet because I'm so full over here.
Right. All I can do is show up. And that's all my boss told me I had to do was to just show up, 2 or 3 weeks in a row, take 1 hour a week and go to that status meeting, finish up Cornelius's project. Now, of course, what if your project runs late?
Yeah.
What if your project consumes more time than expected? What if unfortunately, there's an issue with the resource, they fall ill, they quit? Now what? So you see all these risks compiling, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why we really want to know.
I think this is also a good moment to ask, how often should you reconfirm assignments with the functional manager? I mean, you've been there, the functional manager maybe agreed because they felt they had agreed to agree, or maybe they said, yes, I agree to this, they really want to, but didn't realize that this resource is, overbooked. So how many times should you go back and confirm that I have that resource, right?
Well, that's a fabulous question because the relationship with the functional manager is really very critical. And we want to be in constant contact with that functional manager anyway, and functional managers, because there are probably multiple people who are contributing resources to a project that you're running. And so first, I just want to address that. We never want a functional manager to be blindsided or not hear from us on a regular basis. And so I would recommend that as part of your regular communication plan that you have, hint, that you keep the functional managers in the loop so that you're communicating with them regularly, that you're letting them know what is happening. Now, coming back to your specific question, I would say that depending on how long the stretch of time has been since you had the original discussion with them and when the project really starts, that you touch base with them at least once a week. And so let's say a month ago, I came to someone's office and I sat down and I said, I need a business analyst. And they said, here's who it's going to be. Here's the percentage of the time you get for that person. I say, great, project starts in a month. I would probably begin to check in with them and just touch base with them and say, just a heads up, project is still starting on May 2nd, are we still okay? Here's my understanding. Thank you. And I would probably keep doing that each week before. Some might be phone calls, some might be emails, some might be, if we're co-located, popping my head in the office door. And that way it leaves the door open for that person to let me know something has changed. Another project has slipped. Oh, we forgot this person had vacation time, that type of thing. And so in the spirit of open communication, then there should be no surprises between us.
All right. So this is something that we can do on a more personal level on the relationship that we have with the functional managers. What about on the procedural level? Is there anything that we can do with hard tools to avoid these kind of, assignments that are non-assignments almost?
Yes. In a perfect world where so many of us do not run projects, we wouldn't even have to talk about this because it would never happen. And the reason it would never happen is with our project selection process, when we had our team of individuals who were representing the company and making the project selections for what we should be doing with company time and money, part of that process would be that a project wouldn't be approved for kickoff until resources are available. And projects would kick off based on their priorities so that we always know we have our resources working on the highest priority projects at any given time. And the project selection committee would understand, because even if at the selection committee level, they might not know the names of the people performing the work, they would have an idea as to the resource pool, the types of skills in the resource pool. And when a project idea was walked into this committee and said, here's a project, it's really fabulous, we should do this, it's going to really meet our strategic goals this year, and it's going to take these types of resources and this many of them and for about this period of time, with that would be a resource utilization forecast plan. And then they would look at it and say, okay, this is great, but right now, based on what else is happening, we can't start it until 45 days. And they would look at that. Now, if starting it in 45 days is too late, then our project selection committee would go through the process of deciding, should something else be stopped or put on hold because this is more important. And so in this way, this would happen. There'd be no pressure for those poor functional managers to start a project when they don't really have someone, because that decision would have been taken care of ahead of time. And so they wouldn't be put in this, between this rock and this hard place.
Yeah, so in other words, transparency in resource assignment leads to or doesn't lead to this kind of situation, because you as project manager, you can probably look at it yourself and see,
Exactly.
the people I need aren't even available.
Yeah. But when we don't have that kind of transparency and people get in trouble if on your status report it says, project kickoff on hold due to lack of availability of a business analyst with expertise in this area, and everyone knows whose group that is and who's going to get the phone call. Yeah, nobody wants that.
Right. Okay. So, yeah, that's in a perfect world. What if we don't have such processes in place? What can we do?
Well, yeah, if they're not in place, okay, now I have to tell you that sometimes I get a little in trouble with functional managers for what I'm about to say. So I'm going to just, with a heads up, I apologize if you get complaints. I think it's smart for project managers to be aware of the resource pool. I don't mean it in a nosy and intrusive way, but you're the one who's going to be holding the bag, and you're the one who is going to have challenges if the resources don't exist. And so I encourage you to have a little bit of awareness, and that maybe you even kind of pay attention to what's going on around you, so that you understand where resources are assigned, so that if you're getting the push to start the project, and that one particular business analyst with that level of expertise in that specific area, they're fully allocated to 3 other projects, and those 3 other projects don't end for 60 days, you can, have a different kind of level of conversation, do a different kind of planning.
We project managers, we also have some hard tools that we can use to help us, at least in the beginning of the project, when we are in the forming stage, to determine, are they really working? Is progress being made? Let's talk about these. You have a couple of suggestions of things we can use here.
Well, if I had a really well-defined work breakdown structure, and there were clearly defined activities, and each activity had clear completion criteria, then I would know what to look at to know whether or not the work was being completed. And if I followed a very highly recommended best practice, which is don't let team members go longer than the distance between two status reporting periods in order to produce something, that's an early warning system. So it makes the work easier to manage and also easier to estimate. But it's your early warning system. And so if this poor person, is coming and sitting in my meetings and smiling at me, but now, it's been two status reporting periods, and the way the work was broken down, it means that day she was going to present to us a section of the requirements or a major list of, the high-level requirements, and she doesn't do it. I have my warning system. I know that there's trouble, and I can go research.
And talking about the status reporting periods, there's something then very interesting that you wrote in the article. And you said you have to make sure that the deliverables that are assigned to somebody should be delivered in between the status. So don't give deliverables that are like 6 status reporting periods out, because you can't really follow up with people. Make sure that it's, by next status, you have something delivered. By the status after that, you have something else delivered, making sure that there is constant visual progress.
Exactly. And that, by the way, that also helps to make our meetings more useful. Because if you've ever gone to a status meeting where somebody insists on having a status meeting every week, and every week everyone just looks at each other and says, yep, fine, yep, still working on it.
It's 90% done.
Exactly. I'm 90% complete. I've been 90% complete for 6 weeks. That's a super boring meeting. And those are the kind where people start saying, do we have to have this meeting? Everything's fine. Can we just take it off the calendar? And by the way, there are going to be times where, sure, the answer is take a meeting off the calendar. I don't want anyone to die by meetings. But if there are sections of work that are due on a regular basis, the purpose of our meeting should be reviewing and discussing and sharing and looking at the completion criteria to make sure it's really true, that the next person knows that it's completed so they can take it and carry it forward. That's what we should be doing. And so this is another thing to look out for. And this might be done on, purposefully, or it may not. And that is that, I suppose a hint could be if there is a particular group you work with who always insists that their first deliverable or two of the project is a month and a full month and it can't be broken down, I would test that a little bit. And I'm never saying let's go call somebody a liar, because that's not good form. I would just encourage that there would be some way that during that month when they're working on something, there's something that could be shown.
Do you have an example for us how you personally handled a situation like this? I mean, you have a long history of being a functional manager yourself. You've been a project manager. You've been a consultant and trainer. I bet there is a story that you have from your own work life in which you've had to deal with something like this. How did you deal with it?
Well, so I am...
Without blaming anybody or naming the innocent here.
If I blamed anyone, I would probably blame myself, because as you know, my lessons learned are usually because I learned them the hard way, and I'm trying to share them so other people don't have to. I'm thinking of a couple of different situations, and I'm toying with which story to tell, not because of any person involved, but just because what would be the most useful. Okay, I will tell you a story of when I had an unpleasant surprise. And I was working with someone, and he was very good at his job and very reputable. But my warning bells were going off. And I think in hindsight, which is always perfect, the reason my warning bells were going off is knowing this person, when he was really involved and really working on something, he spoke in detail. I mean, he didn't always tell you, and this was a very, very technical person, by the way. And so he didn't always tell you every bit and byte. But when he was really working on something, he was always very enthusiastic about his work. And so he would be sharing with you in a status meeting or other times what's happening when, why is he using a certain approach. And in hindsight, on this one project, he wasn't doing that. He was filling out the status report with the basics, on track, everything okay, no issues to report. But the detail was missing. And that, because of understanding how he worked, I'm lucky in that situation, I understood how he worked. That was a good warning system for me to go find out what was going on, to maybe try to have a conversation with him and say, hey, X, you're not communicating the way you usually do. Is everything okay? And I didn't. And what happened, unfortunately, was things got to a point and it was time to integrate with his piece. And there was no piece to integrate with. Nothing had been done. And he was just devastated. He knew it was coming. And I don't know if I had had the private conversation with him, what he would have been comfortable to tell me, because what I will say is that the person he worked for was not doing this maliciously. Earlier, you asked, do people do this maliciously? And I will say this is as close as I've ever come to thinking someone was being malicious. His boss had told him not to work on this project because she thought something else was more important. And so he was being torn between the two of us. And in that situation, I was a consultant. You mentioned I've been a consultant. So I'm a guest. I'm not going to be there long term. I don't write his review. But again, he was a good, honest person. So he was really torn up. And that was really unfortunate, really unfortunate. And what was unfortunate for the person, his boss, the woman he worked for, was she didn't make the best choice because the project happened to be very important to this area where we were working and to our CIO. And it cost her. I learned later it cost her that ultimately she was demoted for this error in judgment. And again, it was horrible for him because he wasn't that person. And the day that it came where like there was nothing to integrate with, I'm going to say he was very close to tears. So and if I had acted on my project manager intuition and had asked for more prove-its, like give us a little test, give us a little integration test, it would have been exposed earlier.
Okay, so let's see what project managers can do in order to avoid this. And this is, of course, the moment when I want to mention that our discussion and the article that the discussion is based on is only a small aspect of why people don't do their job.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Margaret, you have a whole coachinar on this topic where you not only go deeper into the subject, but you also go broader and you look at other aspects, right? Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about this. Give us the 1-minute spiel about the coachinar.
Let's say you found out that there's someone on your team and they aren't working. And it's not because they haven't been assigned or they haven't been told not to, or the discussion that we've been having. There are times when people don't do their jobs. And we're going to discuss the 3 primary reasons that people do not do their jobs. The truth is that most people want to be thought of as good, smart professionals. And most of us do want to do our jobs. And we're going to talk about why there are times when people do not and what you can do about it, because it's not because they are lazy or incompetent. It is because they need your help, project managers. And that's what we're going to look at is what can you do? So why does it happen and what can you do about it?
And where can people find out more about this?
I would love it if people would come on over to eLearning 4 PMs. So that's eLearning, the number 4 PMs.com. And right on our front page, we have a banner, which you can click to follow through and sign up and join us. We're doing it at 2 different times. We have an evening session and a noon session. It's a 1-hour coachinar.
All right. To close, we've already talked about several triggers that our listeners can use and look out for if someone whether someone is on top of their work or not. I think the primary trigger should, of course, be, as you called it, their project management warning bells. But let's assume the bells are not going off in full, they're not turned up to all the volume up to 10. But what other triggers could they use? How could they see that something's wrong and it looks like they're not working here?
There's something that I didn't address, which is, I addressed the fact that they're at least showing up in your meetings. What if they're not showing up at all? That's a big warning. And so you're not seeing them. They're not coming and participating in your status. They're not providing you status. they're never there when you come to see them. They're not returning voicemails, emails, texts, however you're trying to reach out to them. That's a gigantic trigger. Because if they won't even talk to me, unless they just find me super annoying, if they won't even talk to me, it's likely they just aren't dealing with me and my project yet. And so I would definitely, pay attention to that. If somebody isn't communicating with you in any way, that's a huge warning.
All right. Margaret, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And that was my discussion with Margaret Meloni on how to determine if people are actually doing their job on our projects. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com, and please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com. And when you write, do tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this. In any collection of data, the figure that is most obviously correct, the one that is beyond any need of checking, that is the one that is the mistake. Until next time.